Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're based all over the world. We're welcoming you to the third webinar of the European Initiative of the Competition Innovation Lab at George Washington University. I'm Oscar Borgogno. I'm Senior Fellow at the lab, and I'm the head of the regional initiative of the lab. And today we're speaking about telecommunication markets in Europe, how it interacts with competition policy and sector-specific regulation. And we're very fortunate today to have three speakers that are extremely knowledgeable on the topic. They worked extensively, both either as academics or as experts in the private practice. Today with us, there is Carlo Cambini. He is professor in industrial organization at the Politecnico of Torino. He's a member of the scientific committee of the Florence School of Regulation as well, and he specializes in industrial organization and policy, competition policy and regulation, with a special focus on the economics of public utilities and, of course, of telecom markets. We do have today also Eliana Garces. She's a senior fellow at the Competition Innovation Lab, so she's, let's say, a colleague of mine in the lab, but she's also a co-founder of Help Economics. She's a long, huge experience in antitrust and regulatory issues in both the public and the private sectors. And before joining the private practice in the industry, she started her public career as a member of the Competition Chief Economist team at the European Commission, and later served in the cabinet of the European Commission Vice President of Competition, Joaquin Almunia. Finally, we have Antonio Manganelli. He's professor at the University of Siena, where he teaches competition policy and regulation. He worked extensively on competition and regulation in public utilities. He developed hands-on experience in quite a few markets, particularly media, digital markets, and postal services and telecom, because he served in different public institutions in Europe, the UK Competition and Market Authority, the European Commission at the EU body dealing with electronic communication markets, the cabinet of the Italian Ministry of Economic Development, and the Italian regulator of the telecom markets. So again, we're very fortunate to have all of you here with us, and let's kick off our discussion today with our first round of answers from you. So basically, I'd like to know from Carlo how you judge the EU telecommunication regulation framework so far in Europe, how he managed to deal with the problem he was meant to address, and you sure that he managed to achieve this such a framework managed to achieve the innovation in the industry that it was supposed to achieve in the first place? So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Oscar. Thanks for the kind invitation. That's a very difficult questions because the European Union, the European Commission always update the European framework, and in recent times also introduced new schemes on this. And of course, the problem, to my view, is that in some sense there might be too much intervention and too much state intervention, that this was reduce somehow the incentives in the past, at least the incentive for firms to invest. That's especially for fixed, but also in part for mobile industry. So, of course, that's probably the reason why we are here to discuss. There is the room for modification. That something is already on the table that we might discuss a bit later. But the idea is that I think that European Commission now needs to modify, to introduce something new in order to spur investments in the industry.
Yeah. Indeed, the topic is huge, and many objectives were pursued by the European Commission and EU policymakers at the time. And Eliana, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the objective of the regulation, the regulatory framework in telecom initially was not innovation, as you mentioned. It was breaking the monopolies of former national incumbents. And so there was a lot of emphasis put on entry, and so the whole focus, the big framework was unbundling. and the objective was entry. And that created a particular type of competition based on entry, people coming with the competition very focused on price and attractive packages at retail level. And I'm just going to contrast that it's not so much, there was a lot of competition, of little competition, and I'll quickly compare with the US, for example, where the focus has been completely different. And you have maybe less players, but more than less players, what you have is a completely different segmentation of the market and completely different competitive dynamics. The US the premium services are more expensive, but you cannot say that the operators don't compete aggressively. They do. But the market is segmented differently, and that allows for higher margins on premium services. So I think it's more about regulation, determining the dynamics on the market, the dimensions of competition, and who the players are. And I think that's where the question is, which model is more future-proof? I think that's where we're at now.
That's great, yeah, and I hope we're going to have time to go in depth in the issues you raised in your first answer, Eliana. Thank you so much. And Antonio, indeed, many objectives have been mentioned, from unbundling the oligopolistic market we have to deal with at the EU level, and ensuring innovation might have been a secondary objective at the beginning in the mind of policymakers, but then things changed going forward. And what's your take on this?
Yeah, yes, definitely. As was said before, in the European regulatory framework, investment in networks as long as been seen as a means of promoting infrastructure and competition. So it was a mean of promoting competition. So it was not an objective of the regulatory framework since the beginning, and it explicitly began an objective of the framework with the 2018 code, where the promotion of investment in high capacity network became an autonomous regulatory objective. So if we want to look about the successful of the regulatory framework, if you look at the initial objective, so the opening of the market, as Eliana was saying, the entry of new operators, definitely the regulatory framework in Europe has been a successful story. So reaching the targets in terms of competition enhancement and also downstream pressure on prices. While there could be mixed result if we think about investment, because there is now this narrative about that Europe in terms of investment is not so badly positioned, so the investment, the regulatory framework really contributed to that. While we should, according to me, to my opinion, we should distinguish between what kind of investment we are considering, because the investment that should directly be attributed to the regulatory framework are the investment of new entrant accessing the network of the former incumbent and progressively building their own networks, like in the ladder of investment kind of narrative, which are not the main in terms of quantity investment that we can see now in the market. And of course, also a lot of investment have been deriving recently from public subsidies. So of course, what kind of investment directly derived from the current regulatory framework is really an untrivial question to analyze. What instead, according to me, is not been a success, which not directly depends on the regulatory framework, but even the regulatory framework didn't intervene on that, is the fact that the sector has been progressively commoditized. So the competition mainly based on price competition, not so much quality competition. And of course, this is not something that the regulatory framework was addressing directly, but still it was framed, didn't give an incentive to the competition on quality. And that's something that maybe the new legislation could address.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And there are so many issues that are already on the table, and we'll try to unpack all of that in the following minutes. But of course, many try to delve in the policy space with such issues. And the last The last one to take issue with that was Professor Draghi. Indeed, in the Draghi report that was published in 2024 on European competitiveness, telecom market was a main chunk of the analysis and of policy recommendations. And indeed, there was kind of a push for facilitating consolidation at the EU level in order to facilitate investments in innovation. This is something already Antonio mentioned, but it was basically highlighted as a measure step forward that EU policymakers should consider. On the other side, we did have many economists that criticized such a view. In particular, we had a piece on Voxeo last year written by Tommaso Duso, by Tommaso Valletti, Martin Pates, and Massimo Motta. I mean, big names in the field of industrial organization, criticizing the Draghi Report recommendation as dangerous and misguided. So it's really interesting for us to know your view on these and on the Draghi Report recommendations, if they spotted the problem in the right way and if they address it accordingly. And again, Carlo, you might start first on these again.
Yes, so Aina, the Draghi Report was correct in my point of view when it points out the need of more the regulation in the market and a new approach in order to sustain in investments and sustain in new technologies adoption and so on. So that overall the framework was correct to my personal view. But I think, and I need to confess that I share the view of the economists. I mean, most of them are friends, by the way. That the idea of consolidation was also correct to my personal view. But especially once we have in mind consolidation of firms across countries. So, I mean, what we might expect from a big consolidation in Europe is that a firm from Italy merge with a firm from Spain or a firm in Germany and so on and so forth, creating big operators in Europe. So, cross-country mergers is something that I would like to see and I would appreciate a lot. Also, because this will imply a sort of change in the market definition, I would say, what we have in mind. So what we notice until now is that firms compete at the national level. There is no offers across countries that we see. So I come from Italy. We have a lot of operators in Italy competing one to each other, but for example, not Orange, not Deutsche Telecom, not Telefonica, and so on and so forth. I mean, well, Telefonica also for corporate issue. But I mean, that's the issue that I have in mind. So is the Draghi Report correct? To my view, yes, especially for cross-border merger, and less in line with the Draghi Report if we look at the within-country merger. Why? Because within-country mergers are the ones that have been, longly studied, especially for most of the economies that you mentioned before. And I mean, I'm an academic, so I mean, I see the evidence. The evidence basically points out that the merger, for sure, will increase prices. So will be a sort of a relaxation of the economic efficiency of competition, while there is no clear evidence of increasing in investments. Now, the point is that how we measure the dynamic efficiency, how we measure investments. Most of these papers, for example, focus on the standard measure that we have, the accounting measure of CapEx. That might be a good way to measure dynamic efficiency, but might not be the only one. I mean, what is important is that the network will enlarge, people will be served, and the speed will increase. So maybe we might need, and I know that the European Commission is going to study this kind of problem, we might need to introduce new measures of capex, for example, speed or performance in terms of latency, whatever. I'm not a technology guy, so I mean I leave this to others. But that's the idea. So still, we need to first see if there are some evidence on this effect before asking for a consolidation in the market. In this perspective, I'm going to leave the floor to my colleague. I think that even though it's not perfect, and I understand that might be a bit provocative, I would say, because of the approach, I don't dislike, let's say like this, the recent UK analysis for the merger in UK, the last one between, if I remember, 3 and, now I don't remember the 2 operators which are very involved, the number 2 and number 3, if I remember correctly. So the point was that what they did, they introduced for investment some sort of, dynamics of investment. So you are allowed to merge if you also follow a very specific plan in terms of investments, so in terms of coverage and of the country and so on and so forth, with some checkpoint, I would say, so points of intervenience or monitoring the investments, and also introducing schemes penalties in case of not fulfilling the investments that have been committed to. So this is something that, it's a more a regulatory approach, I must confess. And we know that merger is more antitrust point of view, so more ex post rather than ex ante. But at the same time, whenever we need a sort of, hybrid approach, maybe this kind of approach could be something that might be evaluate over time in order to see if this works or not. So overall, just to answer to you, in short, consolidation, yes, very happy, especially for cross-border from within country. Okay, we might evaluate this, but we need more instruments, and until now, the evidence does not support a merger wave in the market, at least to what the current economic literature is suggesting to us.
Thank you, Carlo. And indeed, one of the points raised by Duso et al. in the article was basically that the telecom market is still a matter of national member states rather than an EU-wide market. So basically, allowing consolidation might risk just raising, prices at the national level rather than ensuring cross-border consolidation. But I'm curious now to learn Eliana's point of view on these.
Yeah, Oscar, I think you point to the right topic here. I think there's a tension in what we're trying to achieve and what can be achieved maybe today. I think the Draghi Report highlights 2 issues or 2 problems in the telecom sector. One of them is the lack of scale, so the financial weakness in the face of investment needs and the lack of scale, with this implicit assumption of, oh, if we had scale, they will, that's a little bit the solution of choice implicitly in the report is we're going to support investment, but mostly through scale, we would be able to achieve the efficiencies and set the incentives right. It's very unclear how we achieve that at European level. Let me note that the big operators are already in several countries in the European Union. They just segment. The markets are segmented, and so they operate in different entities, but they're already present. So it's not that they haven't left their domestic markets. So the issue is what do we, is there a goal of building a genuine pan-European markets for connectivity? What would that look like? Can we solve the spectrum issues? Do we need more than harmonization? I don't think there's a clear direction there. And so I'm not sure that's where the immediate solution lies. But I think it's probably work in progress. Clearly, what we're going to see, I think, is this desire to support investment in whatever way and see and foster an evolution of the networks. So I think it's hard to predict, what happens still at national level in terms of consolidation. But I would suspect that little by little we'll have less emphasis on price. At least price will not be the only factor looked at. There will be more weight given to investment incentives and innovation possibilities. I think there will be a lot more attention paid to dynamic issues, even potentially connecting to resilience and building a network that is competitive and future-proof. I think the reconciliation with the consumer welfare standard will be increasingly an interpretation of the consumer welfare as choice rather than price. So it's like, are there sufficient alternatives for users and consumers and potentially business users? Are there sufficient alternatives to the consumers? And if that is there, then it will be assumed that the consumer welfare is sufficiently protected. It's unclear how that will play out. It's unclear how the trade-offs will be made. So I think that's the direction we're going into or towards. The operationalization, that's I think the question that regulators will have to resolve. How do you address concretely the trade-offs? How do you measure incentives? I think the case of the UK, it was Vodafone and Three, where when the CMA required investment commitments as a condition for the approval, combined with commitments on prices as well, right? So as the investment grows, the commission of the price commitments fade is an interesting solution. But in fact, but what you would like is make sure the incentives are there, right? That the market conditions are there for incentives to happen. And there's also the underlying question is like, what are you investing for? Like, what are you building, right? I think that's a question that we sometimes leave a little bit on the side, but we need to think about is like, well, what investment is needed? What are we building for? What does the economy want? And is that what the network, what the system will generate? So I think the tension between scale and national markets is still unresolved. I don't think that will stop but we will see some evolution in the treatment of how we assess market outcome in the telecom space.
Yeah, thank you, Eliana. And I would argue that an additional layer of complexity we have to deal with in the EU comparing to the UK is that we still have to pursue the internal market objective, right? And this is something, at least in the UK, that is not a priority anymore since Brexit. And again, it might not be that easy to check commitments on the consolidation part in this case, but I'm just hypothesizing on these. And Antonio, what's your take on the Draghi Report recommendation?
Yes, I will start in your question and talking about merger control, whether merger control should be amended, and I will start with that. And my answer is a yes, and then I will go and explain why this could affect telecoms. Is a yes because of course the guidelines that are now enforced are quite old, of course, and they don't really reflect the markets and the issue that they are now at stake. So also the European Commission, of course, is very aware of that, opening the consultation on the merger guidelines. And even if it's not the modification of the rules of the law, still is very important piece of soft law, which is really influencing how the merger rules are applied. And this need is especially true, according to me, for network industries, so the capital and technological intensive industries, regulated industries, and also for those industries which deal with strategic assets. And the telcos embodies all of them. So I think really all these issues are really important to be taken into consideration in revising the merger enforcement and merger guideline. Two of the main things that were already mentioned before by Eliana and Carlo is rethinking the role of efficiencies, also out of market efficiencies, because of course a sector in which you have a lot of massive positive externalities like telcos, of course, is something that you have to take into consideration in the merger, and maybe not only as a mere defense if you if the competition authority find a significant impediment of effective competition, but at the beginning of the assessment as an integral part of the theory of DARM. So really looking at the whole. The other part, which was mentioned before, is internalizing the dynamic effect of innovation. So talking about the dynamic competition and the investment. So not only looking at the short-term price focus, but for example, looking at quality, upward pressure of price that could derive from merger, but which is induced by enhanced quality. That is, of course, something that currently is not done. And also, if you go more technical, instead of looking only the price diversion ratio, maybe looking also in innovation diversion ratio and the relationship between the two. So it's all kind of issues that, in a nutshell, means to look at consumer welfare, long-term consumer welfare, rather than only short-term one, which is highlighted by price. And going back to Draghi, of course, Draghi is talking about the scale of operator, but under the light of competitiveness. So a competitiveness in the concept that he defines as innovation-driven competitiveness and not competitiveness deriving from short-term cost reduction, which is also giving us some indication of what kind of competition he's talking about. Because Draghi is also saying in the report, as is often quoted, that competition is the base of competitiveness, which is very true, but he has in mind, according to me, to my interpretation, a certain kind of competition which not necessarily is the highest intensity of competition, which is not necessarily the more beneficial for consumer in all kind of markets. So this kind of consideration that have been done before about the dynamic effect of competition, the effect on innovation, on investment, and also the role of efficiencies are all elements that, if are internalized in the competition assessment, in the merger assessment, are able to align a bit the competitiveness objective with the competition objectives. And the other point about Draghi is because is in his report, there is always this narrative about favoring ex-post intervention rather than ex-ante, which is as always generally read as favoring antitrust enforcement vis-a-vis regulation, which is true, most likely, but it's also true, it's also dynamic within the competition policy. So in a way, favoring ex-post assessment when some illicit behavior, especially collusion, and we're talking about mobile market, is there, rather than looking, for example, at coordinated effect of a merger ex-ante. So looking at the higher risk of collusion after mergers. So, and taking that into consideration in order to see if the merger to be approved or not. That's a typical and very important ex-ante versus ex-post kind of assessment. And maybe this kind of risk, instead of being assessed ex-ante, should be, let's say, inhibited ex-post if collusion really materializes and takes place.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. And listening to your answer, I thought about the inverted U relationship between, product market competition and innovation.
Yes, of course, that's,
exactly.
That's something yes.
The famous article by Aguillon et al. Back in 2005, something like that.
Yes. No, but this is really important conceptual piece of work, and also being based on empirical data that work, if I'm not wrong. Of course, internalize in a way all these aspects that we are talking about in a more theoretical way.
Yes, exactly. And we will have time now to explore the problem in more detail, entering, one of the large pillars of the telecom market, which is the fixed telecom infrastructure. And I'm really curious to know whether you think are the real problem when it comes to the fixed grid, the fixed network, and given also, the discussions going on at the EU Commission level. We had a lot of talks in the past about the fair share proposal to ensure, the right allocation of costs between the provider of the infrastructure and the companies that are actually using the services provided by the infrastructure providers. And again, maybe we're not talking anymore about fair share proposal. Now the discussion is about the Digital Network Act, which is just in the making by the European Commission. I'm really curious to know, Carlo, if this is the right approach to deal with the problems affecting, the fixed telecom market or not. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, let's start again with what Eliana and Antonio already said before, which is clearly important. The regulatory framework was created from the very beginning to spur competition in the market in terms of prices. So now we want to change the framework. The framework is we need more investment, and I share this view. So if we modify the target of regulation, of course, we need to modify the regulatory tools that we put in place. That's the most important stuff. So until now, in terms of infrastructure, we always focus on access regulation, access oriented to cost, long-run incremental cost plus mechanism, all mechanism that was extremely technical at the beginning, but it was aimed in order to avoid and eliminate the potential benefits that vertically integrated operator had with respect to entrance. Okay, that was the topics. Now the framework totally changed. At least this is my view. The target is completely different. And then we also notice who is investing. So it's no longer true that all players are investing in the market. Only very, very few players are investing in infrastructure. Some of them are alternative operators, cable TV operators in some European countries, or a few alternatives, infrastructure telecoms operators, and then the incumbents. So not all of them. So now my point is, if we want now to modify the regulatory target, and this is my reading, the target of the DNA, of course, we need to make access regulation less stringent and new. I would say new. New in which perspective? Well, new, for example, in terms of introducing a potentially new element in terms of, for example, long-term contract. So the idea that you might sign contract with some specific operators with some flexibility in terms of prices in order to obtain more favorable condition and access to the network. Facilitating network sharing. I'm a fan of co-investments. I work on co-investments quite a lot in my academic activity. And I think in cases in which you need a lot of investment, sharing is a good way to have a widespread network within a country. The clear example is in France. France introduced a sort of obligation to share. Okay, so in France, in some specific areas, operators that decided to invest had to present a notification to the national authority. The national authority then says, is there anyone else that wants to invest with this guy? Yes, I want. And then they are obliged to co-invest. This is important because you share the investments cost, but also the risk. And this is interesting. Co-investments, anyway, require some rules. And so it's important to take into account this. Some of these rules have been already discussed in the previous paper. Yeah.
Sorry if I interrupt you, but can you just explore a little bit more what you mean by co-investment? You mean co-investments by operators at the same level of the value chain, or also by users? Yes. Or
so you need to invest in fiber in a city. You need to invest in fiber in a city. So the point is there a company X the company X is not a good example. The company Y that wants to invest in the city, yes. The company Y can also share the investment with the company Z in order to, create an infrastructure which is widespread within the city, and so hopefully increase the coverage within the entire country. That was the idea. Let's need the rules. The rules have been already discussed in the European communication framework, but in a way which was difficult to be implemented.
So this
And
will
then
be kind of forced collaboration. Basically, the first investor cannot deny the second investment seeker to join the initiative. That's your point. Yeah.
that was the French co-investments approach. So an obligation to co-invest. The other countries decided not to go in this direction. Was a more commercial-driven co-investment approach. Might be one of the two. It seems that the French case, there was a recent report by a consulting company, Bloom Economics, if I remember correctly, that points out the positive effect of co-investments in France. But I'm not saying that that was the only reasonable approach. But the idea to have this kind of approach might be relevant for a new framework. Finally, and to conclude, we might also lift regulation where needed, but we need to take into account again exactly the target. Which is the target? If the target is investments, we need to take into account at least the effect on the investments company. Okay, so the networks are not developing in parallel. So not all firms are investing in the same city, in the same area. So this implies that in some areas we might have competition, in some areas not. So it's I would say an abuse to me to say we need to lift the regulation overall, because it depends on the markets and where we have competition. So the area where we have competition, where we don't have competition. So market analyses are important to understand which kind of approach to introduce. And finally, to me, potentially in the long term, of course, one potential and important rules to implement is a sort of what we call copper switch off. So if the legacy introduce some constraints, okay, especially for the incumbent, because the incumbent doesn't want to jeopardize the revenues they are collecting in the old network. So probably introducing a formal deadline or introducing a target or an overall, I don't know, might be relevant in order to say, oh, look, we need to change the approach, we need to migrate to a new technology. You need to have some years, 10 years, 8 years, I don't know how much to do this. That's important. It's also an important signal in terms of commitment for the investors.
Thank you so much, Carlo. This is a fascinating issue, and indeed you raise many potential solutions that are really worth considering. And Eliana, again, we are talking about this issue that goes really at the heart of the current problems we are facing at the economic level. Also, it's all about, how to ensure artificial intelligence development, how to move the transition towards an Internet of Things based economy, and how to make sure the infrastructure is adequate to support all these. And indeed, the transition to cloud is really a core part of the discussion as well. So feel free to provide your answer on how to improve the situation at the moment. But I'm really curious to know your take on this.
Yeah, I think Carlo made an excellent presentation of the investment / regulation conundrum, and I think that was very comprehensive. So I just want to add also that Carlo talked about the need to update the framework and the need to invest in next generation and high speed and so on. I think it's important to point out also that the development is not only quantitative in terms of quality, but also qualitative in terms of the networks are changing. We're having the trend of servitization of connectivity. That means that the infrastructure itself is changing. So it's not only the network now. We have to think about the cloud. We have to think about edge computing. There's many more components now that create the connectivity service with many more players. And relationships are partnerships. So that again, the competition is also will change, right? So we're not just talking now about the cables or the. I think we're going towards an environment where net connectivity is an ecosystem. And so we have to also start preparing and considering that. I don't have the answers, but I think over time there might be a little bit of a framework adjustment there that may have to happen. where I think the issue of co-investment, and you were pointing to that, Oscar, as well, is not only about investing together at the same level, but co-investment and partnership will be about building an ecosystem together. And then, of course, you can also then add the layer of, what are the revenue streams? Who owns the relationship with the users? So it becomes a lot more complex. And I think we're going to see that evolution, and it will be important that the regulatory framework does not inhibit this type of evolution, grant the flexibility for operators to adjust and find their place in a way that is viable and allow them to evolve and grow. And I think issues like the fair share or debate that I think will have to be and will end up being considered a little bit in that framework as well, because that's the reality of it. The big tech increasingly are not just users; they also are investors in connectivity. And it's interesting because you see the same thing in AI with the energy, where the providers of AI services are also becoming energy investors because it's so critical to them. And so you see economic players going a little bit over their borders, and you can imagine connectivity suppliers also going potentially into more into services. And so I think the flexibility will be important. An ecosystem approach might be called for, allow for evolution would be a little bit my headline here, and keep the regulatory framework useful for today, but not this. But it's important it doesn't become a straitjacket too.
Thank you, Liana. And indeed, we talked about fair share, but we didn't explain that. So, Antonio, I will just exploit your competence on the point, also to ask you if you can provide a basic explanation of why policymakers consider the fair share proposal, and now they move forward with the new regulation proposal for the Digital Network Act, and if the fair share regulation was actually, in your opinion, the right approach to tackle the issues so successfully, highlighted and presented by Carlo and Liana.
Yes, it's a very difficult question, this one, because of course this debate is really multifaceted and has different shapes and forms. But in a nutshell, the fair share debate, which is also following from some European Parliament declaration, is the fact that they say in this declaration of the European Parliament that all the actors in the digital ecosystem should contribute to the building of the infrastructure and the networks. And so fair share, because this is a fair share of contribution of all the actors that are in a way enjoying and using the infrastructure to make their own business in order to contribute for the infrastructure. Of course, this can be seen in very different ways, because, and that's trying to summarize the debate. But of course, one way is what also Carlo and Liana was saying, that co-investment could be done by operator on the same level of the value chain, competitors, but also could be done by different operators in different level of the value chain. For example, as Eliana was saying, the big tech are investing a lot in the submarine cables, or most of them, so the big chunk of connectivity which connect the different continent, but also on cloud, as everybody knows. I mean, the hyperscaler is the big tech. We can say that these are complements. So in a way, this kind of activity exploit the positive externalities that the telcos are put in place by building their network, and so they should contribute. That's a narrative. Another narrative is that, of course, content application provider and big tech are mainly content application provider are really a complement in this market, because and user at the end subscribe connectivity also in order to use content application provider. So the provision of content application, in a way, there is cross externalities. So externalities goes in both ways. So the debate was really about how try to compose this relationship, which is very multifaceted, as I said, and now is taking a bit of different forms because still realizing that and basing on the fact that there is an infrastructural and economic convergence in the entire digital ecosystem, and in a way the regulation should try to be consistent in the different part of this ecosystem, recognizing the substitutability that are in place, the complementarities that are in place. And this is also something that is the DNA is going, in my impression, is going towards a regulatory definition in which some pieces of the networks that in the previous framework were considered private network, for example, the part of the cloud, the CDNs, which are the content distribution network, so part of clouds in which there stored some content that the content application provider then delivered to the end users, could be considered at the end in the new framework public networks. And so all the rules about access and interconnections that are now valid for the telecom, electronic communication provider, internet service access provider, could be somehow extended also to these kind of segments of the ecosystem. And this is another way to shape the, let's say, fair share of debate, because of course, when you have this interconnection as an interconnection between two public electronic communication networks, the same rule should be applied, while at the moment there is an asymmetry of the rules when you go at looking at when the content application provider, namely the big tech, provide content, deliver content in the network, in the access network of the internet service provider to reach the end users. So the debate is very complex, and but I think that the Commission with the Digital Network Act is taking this way of trying to make a regulation which is consistent above across all the segment of the digital ecosystem, which is always more convergent, and the complementarity and the substitutability that are there should be for sure recognized by regulation and addressed by regulation.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio, for this thoughtful illustration of the problem. And now we can move to the second part of our discussion, which, by the way, is very much related to the first part, which is the mobile market of telecom. Indeed, we are witnessing cutting-throat competition at the national level in the mobile market. You know, prices are going down, and this again might be a proof of consumer welfare that has been achieved by the EU framework, comparing to other markets abroad. Let's consider the US. I spent there 3 months last year, and I can tell you I spent way more than I'm used to spend here in the EU, and I thought that a problem might actually be about the competition in the mobile market. So, and again, when we talk about the mobile market, we also to consider, you know, the new dimension of the current economy, which is kind of quickly moving towards the Internet of Things, and the fact that many devices that used not to be connected to the internet and interoperable between each other, now they are. And of course, they do that by using the mobile network most of the time. So, you know, the infrastructure, again, is becoming way more important than it used to be in the past. And Carlo, what's your take on this?
Yes, I mean, of course, In the mobile industries, it started in a different way because it was a push for competition, but it was a competition with the investments because all the MNOs were some sense obliged to invest. So that's a completely different issue, completely different settings with respect to the fixed market. So now the discussion is that, of course, the competitive pressure was irrelevant. The price goes down, as you said before, and now we have the need of more investments. And so basically, in terms of regulatory framework, most of the discussion that I see was mostly focused on the spectrum and the spectrum license. In which sense, of course, there might be, have been in the past some auctions. The operators receive the spectrum after paying a large amount of money for that, and now they are asking for typically an extension of the deadline of the license. Okay, so this was the core of the discussion in some sense. You need to expand the length of the license in order to allow me to use it to make more investments in this period without paying for using the spectrum. Here are few elements to my personal view. I'm not against expanding the license time. I'm saying this because, of course, I need also to take into account the profitability of the industry, which is going down. So, of course, we need to do something. But two caveats into my personal view. First one, we need to be very, very precise on this. A recent consulting company presented the report for Ofcom in 2024, showing empirically that there was no link between expanding the length of the license and more investments in the industry. Okay, so not necessarily expanding the infrastructure means that the company has more time to do more investments. Okay, probably simply to allocate in a different way the investment they already planned. So for this perspective, I'm fine. Again, as I repeat myself. So okay, let's expand the license, but with some constraints. The constraints is that first we need to avoid spectrum hoarding. So if you don't pay for spectrum, of course, operators want everything. Okay, even if they don't know how to use it, and this is not good in general. So economics sense simply says that spectrum is a public good. This is a public good should be paid. I'm not saying that should be allocated necessarily through an auctions. I'm a fan of an auctions, but okay, it's not the moment. I understand this, but might be other instruments, administrative incentive pricing schemes adopted in UK in the past. Other pricing mechanism can be adopted, but still with the caps in order to avoid spectrum hoarding. And the second, if the goal is again investments, the idea is okay. I will give you more time, but we need to commit on investments. So with a precise commitment on investments over time in order to fully coverage the country, or with 5G only infrastructure, or whatever kind of solutions that each country has in mind, with some commitments, which is important to me. Again, Eliana already said this before, and I share her view. Might be an interim measures, okay? Because mobile industries has been always perceived as a competitive industries. We don't need to intervene too much, okay? But still, in this period, might be some possible few routes just in order to give more public goods to the operators for free eventually, or for very few amount of money, but at the same time asking them to reach the target that they committed to do. Finally, mobile industry is an industry where network sharing worked quite a lot in the past. This is similarly important. And also there was a change also in operators. Now we have a lot of tower companies that we might refer to them as a wholesale only operators. So they manage infrastructure only, and they do not provide retail service. So to me, this is something that should be, we need to continue to go in this direction. Again, as before, even in these industries, some areas are very costly to cover, even with mobile solutions, okay? So probably network sharing is a way to, is an important way to have coverage with less duplication of fixed cost.
Thank you so much, Carlo. We're running out of time, but the issue is so fascinating. And again, Eliana, if you want to add on these, take your time, and the floor is
Just
yours.
very quickly, and I'll give the floor to Antonio. I think the spectrum issue is important if we're talking about IoT and the development of connected services. My instinct would be, make spectrum available, make it relatively accessible. That said, IoT connected services will require more than spectrum to be deployed. There's a whole regulatory environment concerning data issues containing a standardization that will need to go together with spectrum. But I think spectrum is a part, and again, if you want the service, make the resource available as much as possible. So I think it would be good to have an effort, a different kind of spectrum, maybe for sensors, for cars. Those are all different bandwidths, and for mobile, I think there will be also a convergence with fixed. People are increasingly, mobility is a must now in services at retail. So you'll have the service, I think, is less and less separated between fixed and mobile, and I think it's the combination of the two that we're seeing, with important space for Wi-Fi everywhere. I think managing and accompanying demand and the new supply is what will be important here. And so again, flexibility for adaptation, I think, is the key at the moment where we're at. More than extending current regulatory framework to more domains, I think what we need is a reflection of what works. Overall, I think the drive is to change the nature of competition, go towards a bit more of quote unquote US style, with the flaws that we might have, but is try to change the way these operators are competing on the market, and what their objectives are.
Yes, indeed, and this basically underscore the need for strong antitrust enforcement and behavioral remedy oversight by regulators, because indeed the issue is becoming complex and many players are gonna work together. And Antonio, the floor is yours to finish our discussion today, as we're approaching the 1 hour time limit. Unfortunately, we have to comply with.
Yes, sure, of course. Very quickly on the mobile market, and I want to reconnect what I was saying before, because Carlo talked extensively about spectrum, so I wouldn't touch that. And no, the fact that of course, as much as we said before, that much of the discourse surrounding market consolidation referred predominantly on mobile telecom markets. This is primarily due to the distinct regulatory and economic characteristic of this market, because unlike the fixed market, mobile markets are not generally subject to ex-ante regulation, because there is no significant market power situation there, because it's mostly oligopoly with infrastructure MNOs and quite a few mobile virtual network operator. However, de facto, as Carlo was saying, they are regulated through the conditions that are attached to spectrum licenses. So this is a proper regulation. It's a proper regulation which mainly is important because give coverage obligation. So this create for in the mobile market a regulated scale on the supply side, and because of course operators are mobile network operators are required to invest nationwide in the infrastructure, irrespective of the, or not so much according to the localized demand density. So the supply side scale is not always mirrored by an equivalent demand side scale. And this, of course, could affect sometimes, often, as they say, in the return on investment. Of course, this is the major issue about in-country consolidation that the mobile player want to be taken into consideration when the merger are assessed. And then, of course, there are all these issues we mentioned before about the merger assessment, and also the issue that Carlo mentioned about possible remedies about pricing and also investment commitment. While, and I'm closing, I do not well understand the narrative that sometimes is out that referred to the fixed market, that softening somehow the access regulation because there is more competition and so regulation could be softened is equivalent automatically to a consolidation of the market. Because there is always the tendency to equate the number of market players with the intensity of competition, while it is not the same thing. And of course, not necessarily a softening of access regulation in the fixed market will lead to a consolidation in the fixed market. According to me, are two different dynamics.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Short answer, but very sharp and on the point. And the same goes for Eliana and Carlo. I really want to thank all of you for taking part in today George Washington Competition Innovation Lab webinar by the European Initiative. And again, also on behalf of all the viewers, let me thank you once more for your contributions today, and let me wish you a very joyful summer. Thank you so much, and enjoy your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you
very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.